sort of, ish. Um, I was in high school, and there were these two girls that were kind of the misfit, outcast, social fuck ups, and they had a little boombox, and it wasn't even early in the Ramones' career, but for some reason I had just missed their early years, and they were playing. I think they were playing Rockaway Beach or something like that, and it really, it does kind of catch your ear the first time you hear it. It's like, huh, what's that? And they were the cool girls, really. They were the girls that were, listening to something that nobody else in school were listening to. Nope, I thought it sounded good. I thought they were cool, and I liked the fact that these girls had, a taste that I hadn't heard before in music. But it wasn't something that I wasn't really buying that many records right then. I lived with a guy who was a record collector, so I was kind of leeching off his record collection at the time. Yes, I did. Saw them live, and we actually opened up for them once at a festival in Finland in either 86 or 1987. And we were pretty excited about that, just because particularly overseas, the Ramones were kind of, treated as these bigger than life, almost like, cartoon legend icon, Beatles of our generation type figures. And when we got to this country, which was Finland, everywhere we went, people had Ramones paraphernalia, Ramone signs with lyrics, and everyone was just, they couldn't have been more excited about the Ramones coming to their country and playing some show in the remote outback of Finland for a festival. And that was a bill that we were on, and we played early in the day. And they were, headlining and closing, so we got to think about them all day and, see the kind of hubbub that they had created. And my memories of that are probably my most intense Ramones memories, because we were so amped about their show, and backstage before they went on, we discovered that they did something, very kind of bizarre and unexpected from any rock band that I'd ever seen or been exposed to before, which was they rehearsed the entire set at a quiet volume from beginning to end before they went and played it as a performance. They got into their tiny little room with their tiny little amps and just, started counting off songs and going through the whole song, one after another, the entire set list, just making sure it was ready to go, which I think kind of speaks to the strange sense of perfectionism that, a punk rock band like themselves would have. People think of these bands as just being kind of, not necessarily sloppy, but just a little more anarchistic in their musical nature, and these guys were real professional in that respect anyways. So they did that, and we kind of freaked out because we'd never heard anybody do that before. And then we started hatching an ill-fated plan, if you will, which was Flea and myself and Jack Irons, the drummer of our band at that time. For some reason, Hillel, the guitar player, chose not to participate in this shenanigan, but we decided it would be a great moment of homage if we would dance across the stage naked during the Ramones set. And at that time, I had never seen the Ramones play, and I didn't realize that they were all business on stage, and they had their idea of what a show should be in their own aesthetic and their own presentation. And so although we didn't mean to step on any toes, I think we waited for Blitzkrieg Bop or something, and Flea and Jack and I, we all stripped down naked on the side of the stage and danced with love in our hearts across the front of the stage. Not that obnoxious thing where you kind of stop and soak up the spotlight, but just a conveyor belt of 3 naked dancers going across the stage. And then we got off. We weren't trying to be the guy out there who was drunk and, look at me. We just did our business and left, and we thought it was good and exciting, and paying respect to this band. And it turns out that it was very poorly received by the band, particularly by Johnny, who was irate and incensed by the act. And we didn't know this at the time, but afterwards we ran into him in the lobby of this bizarre Finnish compound, and he was yelling at us in a very strict and hateful manner about how we had no business doing that, and who do we think we are, and we ruined their show, and needless to say, my heart sunk, because that was not our intention. It was just to let them know that we were feeling them, and I was just getting smaller and smaller and smaller, and it wasn't, there was no impending physical violence, but it was just, he was really unhappy about our maneuver. And so I continued to shrink and shrink and shrink. And then Joey came up to me after he sort of witnessed this verbal scolding. And he just very simply whispered into my ear, "I thought it was kind of cool," and then walked away. So he kind of spared me from feeling like a jerk forever. It's like, well, if I pissed off, the guitar player, at least the singer was okay with it. And oddly enough, that was my last experience with the Ramones for a very long time. And I would just kind of, hear them here and hear them there, and I always appreciated and respected it, but never really delved deep into the meat of the Ramones. I just, for whatever reason, they escaped me. They escaped my attention in that way for a long, long time. And then I met Rick Rubin, and I remember being kind of shocked and surprised when Rick would give me his, top 5 favorite rock bands ever. And I think he would always put them number 2. He would say there was the Beatles, and then there's the Ramones, and then he would go on to his next, and I was like, wow, that's a pretty top slot there. And that kind of opened my mind to listening to them more and more. And, fast forward to John, being absolutely in love with everything about the Ramones, and in a real soulful way. And I remember when he came to me and said, the Ramones want us to cover a song for a tribute record, a compilation record. And I was like, great, let's do it. And he played for me a song called Havana Affair. And then he showed me how we were going to change it. And that's when I really had to start listening to the Ramones for real. And that's, I was kind of a late bloomer when I really discovered what was happening with this band and just how perfect they were. And, how perfect every individual was, and how even more perfect the chemistry of those people were together. And, one by one, I kind of just had my mind blown, from Dee Dee and Tommy and Joey and Johnny, all of them just being the most unique and personality-filled musicians, and then how well they did together. And that's when I kind of started getting all of their records and listening to them and learning from them and learning how to play along with them and stuff like that. I think that was my only encounter. Oddly enough, I would later become friendly with the guy who hated my guts in that lobby, which was Johnny, because my John started hanging out with Johnny Ramone, and we all kind of, John and I got into collecting antique movie posters, vintage movie posters, and started going to vintage movie poster meets or gatherings with Johnny, and just walking around, listening, talking, learning, checking this guy out, and we became friends, and spending time on different occasions with him and his wife Linda. Well, I mean, it was just kind of understood that we would definitely do it. It didn't even require a real approaching. Um, by that time, Johnny was obviously very sick and had been for a couple of years, and John Frusciante had become closer and closer and closer, really a family member in that Linda and Johnny household there. So, the minute that I knew there was going to be some sort of a benefit show, I mean, of course, we were going to be doing that, and it would be an honor to do it, and it would, be again a great learning experience for me because we had to learn 5 or 6 Ramones songs at that point, and that's, a real education for a singer. Joey Ramone makes it seem so incredibly easy what he does that you almost don't stop to think about the fact that this is one of the greatest rock singers ever, because it's not, full of gymnastics or flash. But if you really listen carefully to every little nuance of that guy's singing style, it's shocking how good he is. And to have to even begin to sing, carry a song that he's singing that sounds so simple and easy and so sing-alongy, was a great education for me, and he became one of my favorite singers from studying him. And I kind of put him up there with Elvis in a strange way. Two guys who seemingly, aren't really singing, Led Zeppelin style songs where it's, blatantly obvious that this guy has vocal chops, but, people that know how to sing a song and make it sound better than anyone else. No, he didn't. We would have been happy to have the suggestions, but I think he knew John well enough to know that we would probably arrive at a wise decision, based on his awareness of John's familiarity with all of their songs. And it was actually an unexpected process, because I think we started off by learning maybe 7 or 8 songs, and we tried them, and then a few of them just didn't suit us, or we didn't really bring anything special to the table, so we shifted gears and ended up playing some more predictable songs to cover, like I Want to Be Sedated. That was not one of our original choices, but then when we tried it just for fun to see how it felt, it was something that was contagious, the desire to play that song. So yeah, in the end we all kind of chipped in, and a lot of it depends on what I'm even capable of doing. I practiced my ass off, with the band and without, because I had to. I had to, just to get to the level of acceptability. There wasn't a lot of talk about wanting to emulate or sound exactly like them. With Havana Affair, it just seemed more interesting to take it and change it a little bit and play it more with the spirit of the Ramones than the actual sonic flavorings of the Ramones. And I'm glad we did that, because we played that live in our set for a long time now, and you feel the Ramones in there, but it sounds different. And with the tribute show, it was more just paying respect and wanting to make the people that were there remember the Ramones and feel the Ramones. And so it was a lot less about us and a lot more about the Ramones. And yeah, we were just trying to play the songs as best we could. We didn't want to be the Ramones or pretend to be the Ramones. We still wanted to be us, but just play those songs as best we could without really getting in the way. And I think for a minute Flea, was doing some sort of method acting where he really wanted to become Dee Dee, but then he realized that it's just not possible. Even as an actor, you can't really capture the essence of somebody with that free of a spirit. Dee Dee is beyond capture, and So he threw that out, but it was something he considered for a minute, where he, kind of wanted to dress like Dee Dee and eat like Dee Dee and do other things like Dee Dee, just to really get into the mode. But then he realized it wasn't necessary. Yeah, he can pick.
Yeah.
He was in Fear a long time ago, and that was all about picking. So he can do it. He just has to practice a lot. It's a real different thing, different muscles and stuff. It was so much fun, just from the very beginning of that day till the very end of that day. It felt right. There was no weird tension. There was no weird, ego tripping. From the minute we got there for sound check, just the ambiance and the energy in that room seemed so right. It was like everyone was there for the right reason, from the people that were playing to the people that were coming to see it. It was really about the essence of the Ramones. There was no kind of malarkey or bullshit going on. And that was a great feeling. I was really happy to see X. I wish that they would have played Ramone stuff more, because I love X, and this would have been more interesting to hear them take on some other songs. I don't know. I really got off on John and Chad and Flea and their kind of channeling of Ramone's love that night. That was probably my favorite thing, was looking over at John and seeing somebody just play Johnny Ramone's guitar parts with so much conviction and love and skill. I mean, that really blew my mind, because there's something hard about capturing the way he really plays. And I think John did a pretty good job of it. But, having said that, I really loved everybody's performance, and I think everyone, elevated to the occasion. It was a magical night. It was a really magical night. There was a lovely shade of destiny happening, Johnny kind of hanging on long enough not to physically see it happen, but just to know that it was happening for him, and then dying a couple days later. It was like that was one of his final things that he wanted to see through in his lifetime. I don't think that I can't remember talking to him after that. I wrote him a letter right afterwards, and he got it right before he died. So I wasn't one of his best friends, but we definitely had a friendship and a really nice connection. And for a guy that could be so seemingly brutal in his acceptance or not of people around him, he was always, in recent years, incredibly kind to me, and in a really honest way. So I felt like it would be wrong if I didn't have some moments of closure with him, just by letting him know that our friendship meant something to me. I didn't want him to think that it, was something that I didn't consider important to me. So I wrote him a letter, and he got it right before he died. Well, I really do think, not just because of what Rick said, but now that I'm a little more acquainted with their body of work, that they really are kind of, the Beatles of the generation, that they were a part of. And it's next to impossible to write that many good songs. It just doesn't happen very often. And the Beatles were kind of the first rock band to just write more consistently incredible songs than any other four-man band had kind of ever done before. And then the Ramones sort of took the ball and did the same thing. We're just record after record after record after record after record of just great songs. So I think history has no choice but to be kind to a band with that much material that's good. You know, it stands the test of time, and you just can't ignore it. You know, if they had done maybe one or two good records, they might have still a mystique about them, like the Sex Pistols. You know, really have one good record, but they're considered, you know, one of the all-time memorable punk rock bands. The Ramones, you know, their legacy is enormous. So I think that I don't know if their popularity will keep increasing, but I think the respect and the kind of their position in rock history will always be seen as big. Well, we were definitely impressed by it. You know, we many years later developed an off again, on again, you know, blue collar, put your nose to the grindstone work ethic. But that really wasn't until probably about 1991 that we started getting that kind of discipline in our band. Yeah, maybe it did have some kind of subtle subconscious effect, you know, in that the guys in my band have actually always been incredibly disciplined musicians. You know, I'm sort of the wild card, X factor. You know, I think if I was as disciplined as they were, it would just seem too you know, hardworking. You need a little balance of someone who's not quite as together as everybody else. But I know John is probably inspired by that kind of work ethic, although, you know, he's had it since he was a little kid.
Yeah.
It is important. I mean, you know, none of that stuff really happens by mistake. You know, people that become that successful and that creatively fertile, it's always because, you know, that's their whole life, and they dedicate hours every day without fail to practice and, you know, working on music. I think it translates. You know, America's just a strange animal, and it's so driven by fads and media, and, you know, this culture is different. It doesn't always honor, you know, that which is good music. It just honors that which is new and popular and different and trendy, and, you know, there's a strange machine that's kind of dictating the taste of what the masses are into in this country, and that machine isn't so powerful in other countries. And I think it's always been like that, and it's not a good thing or a bad thing. I mean, America's just weird like that. You know, I think there's always a very solid pocket of people in America that are more into the Ramones than anything else. It's just not in the kind of numbers as it is in other countries that have different things to tell them what to listen to. Nothing that's really so tangible. I mean, you know, my personal amount of brushes with the Ramones is kind of beautiful and meaningful to me, and the same goes for my band. Just, you know, I think we're lucky to have known them and to have seen them play. And you know, I got to see Dee a couple of times right before he died, you know, which feels good to me to have just made eye contact with a guy like that and been in the presence of his spirit, you know, weeks before he passed away, and the same with Johnny and Joey. And now with Tommy, it's like the one original Ramone who's still left, being at the statue unveiling the other day, to be able to, you know, still be in the presence of that guy is pretty wonderful. It's pretty beautiful. That guy is smart and funny and loving and real. And you know, these are little treasures, and I just feel lucky to have had all of those experiences with those people. Well, me personally, no, but I mean, his speech at that memorial, or whatever it was officially called, was hysterical, because I mean, he unveiled a side of Johnny that even Johnny's closest friends really didn't know about, which was his youthful athleticism, for one thing, that he was a skateboard daredevil and a stickball terrorist, champion of the neighborhood. It's kind of cool to see that he was always a little bit hyper focused in whatever he was doing, and you can kind of see how that eventually evolved and translated into being that way with his guitar and being that way with his band. He wasn't just going to be a casual musician or be in a casual band. It was going to be something very intense and almost assaultive in a way, if that is a word. It is now. It's really cool. I think it's a great idea. That was probably the weirdest thing that the cemetery director said that day, but in some way it's true what he said, even though it wasn't really his place to say it. He was talking about how at first he thought it may have been an act of narcissism to have Johnny create a statue of himself, but then he realized that it was really for all of Johnny's friends to come and have a place to kind of remember him, and that there was a more beautiful reason why he had a statue made of himself. It seemed kind of shocking for him to even suggest, narcissism in that particular circumstance. But, at first it was kind of just funny to hear Linda and Johnny, while Johnny was still alive, planning this statue that would, be happening soon. He was so kind of, I don't know, comfortable with dying. I don't think he really wanted to die, but he was so, truthful about the fact that it was happening and this is how we're going to deal with it. And, the kind of endless banter of them bickering about, the statue and how big it should be and where it should be placed, and, all of his kind of idiosyncrasies really applied to his own death was pretty fascinating. And I think it was a great idea. I don't think it was like, I think I'm so great that I want a statue. It's like, our life and the life of my friends around me is so interesting that we should fucking remember this whole experience we had together, and not just sort of when death happens, it all disappears, but, have a little kind of tangible memorial to remember something cool by. I like it. I like where it is. I love that it's in Hollywood, and it's at my favorite cemetery where I grew up, goofing around in that place.